podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
No question about that.
Hello there, it's Ed here. It's Friday, so normally we'd have a pod out, of course, but these are not normal times, and the Premier League has done something that we never expected them to actually do. And they've taken a winter break, so we have 2 weeks without any football at all. But while Manchester United's players are off in Dubai, sunning themselves and perhaps doing a little bit of training, no question about that is waiting for no man. And we are going to bring you a special interview this week. So on the show, a guest and a nostalgia-filled episode. And I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed this chat. It's been a tough time, of course, for United these past 7 years, 6.5. It's a time when I think the promises of the club and our hopes have been dashed in equal measure. It seems like there's been a never-ending supply of broken dreams. Every week, Paul and I seem to find a new way of talking about Ole Solskjaer's team finding a new nadir, a new low, a new worst performance since Ferguson left the club. And it's a measure perhaps of how bad United have become, how complacent the club has been, and sometimes what little hope we have for the future. And of course, this is a measure of how spoiled we've become, spoiled we were through the Ferguson years when perhaps we didn't realise just how lucky we were. But if you're like me and you're in your 40s, unfortunately, and you'll remember the tough times too, the tough times of the late 70s or the early 80s, mid 80s, when we were reduced to being a cup team, when we hoped for success amid many, all too many Liverpool Premier League or league titles. And one of the things that struck me about this conversation was throughout the period of lack of success from 77 to 86, which this writer covers, United didn't lack for an identity. The fans were there. Old Trafford was filled. It wasn't always great. It wasn't the financial boom of the current club, but it meant something, and it's the fans that did that. And in this book, Sera Sera, by my guest Wayne Barton, I think you really get a sense of Manchester United still meaning something despite not being successful. So my guest this week is the author of more than a dozen books, most of them on Manchester United. And this one, Sera Sera, covers the period from 77 when Dave Sexton was appointed Manchester United manager through to 1986 when Ron Atkinson was fired and Ferguson took over. So anyway, enjoy this one. And here's my conversation with Wayne. So with me is Wayne Barton, who is just about to publish his, I think I'm right in saying, 16th book, Sera Sera, focusing on the time of Dave Sexton and Ron Atkinson at United. Wayne, welcome to, now no question about that. Last time we had you on, it was called Rantcast.
I know it's going to take some getting used to. I'm a long-time listener as well, Ed, so, you've thrown me off guard with this.
Yeah, well,
I hope it's the same.
Fan TV and stuff like that, we didn't really feel like it fit what we do anymore. But people get used to it in the end.
Yeah, exactly. If they don't like change, then stuff them.
So, 16 books, that's quite a career you've built here of writing mostly about football.
Yeah, mostly. Hopefully it's not a case of quantity over quality, as I'm told by goading friends and family on a few occasions. Not all of them about Manchester United, but most of them. And, over recent years, I've tended to concentrate more on United because... Right. Just because the opportunity is there, really. It is crazy for me. I mean, we've known each other for years, Ed, and, it's crazy for me to even have books published, you know what I mean? So to continue to have that is, it really is a dream come true, and yeah, it's amazing.
Well, congratulations on the new one. Kind of fascinating period for United, this one, and not one of overwhelming success, I suppose. At a period when United were a cup team, I guess we'd like to become that again, and then move towards winning titles. What made you think about writing about Sexton and Atkinson, and why the two of them together in this one book?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one. What I originally looked at doing was a book on the 26-year wait between, for a league title from 67 to 93. And I was contacted by BT Sport, to do the film on the relegation era. So I basically looked at what the work that I'd already done. And obviously, it's such a big period of time that I always knew I was running the risk of condensing it way too much into one book. And I thought if the sort of period up until Doherty's sacking was one book in itself, then possibly the following era, Atkinson and Sexton, was another book, without sort of taking it into the Ferguson realm. And when you get into it, there is a lot to unpack in the Sexton era and the Atkinson one. And I know you will know Tony Parker is a United historian, Mr. Moojak on Twitter, and he's always been on at me. Whenever we have conversations, he always insists to me that Dave Sexton needed a little bit more credit than the reputation that he's got. The reputation that he's got for the dour football that his team played. So I thought, do you know what? Yeah, I'll go into that. I'll give it a bit of a fairer analysis if I can. And it has been an eye-opening experience for me as a fan, going back and revisiting some of those Sexton, the Sexton years, because maybe not. I mean, the football wasn't any better from everything that I've seen and everything that I've read, but the reasons for why it wasn't are very interesting. And I thought the Sexton and Atkinson era, particularly the Atkinson one, because it was so compelling in terms of the character that he was and the football that the team played. And like you said, that kind of nostalgic hope that 6 years ago we would have been dreading going back into an era that was like the Atkinson era, and now that we're praying for something similar, just for the entertaining football. So yeah, it's compelling from that aspect. I know a lot of people think when they look back at these kind of periods that because there aren't titles to write about or read about, that they're not as interesting, but I find that completely the opposite. The mechanics of how we rebuild and how it went wrong and why it went wrong, I find those kind of things really fascinating. Yeah,
and you lay that out in some detail for both Atkinson and Sexton in the book. I was kind of interested about Sexton. I mean, you said his football was characterised as dull, and you challenged that a little bit, and perhaps pragmatic and counter-attacking. Perhaps more generous words you use about his time. I'm kind of interested in what you think about why United appointed him. After Doherty, such a manager with such a charisma and a side he'd built with such flair, and Sexton appeared to be both personally and in terms of his football, the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, and I think it was a deliberate thing. When I talked to Martin Edwards about it, he said quite candidly that Sexton was primarily hired because he wasn't as outspoken as Doherty. I wouldn't say that was the number one quality. Obviously, his coaching background and his ability on that score was the primary one, but it certainly did appeal that he wasn't as media savvy as Doherty. And I think really it was that sort of period of time that made us all reflect and realise that a United manager needs to have a certain personality. They need to be able to handle the media. And I think, Sexton was a very nice guy. As for why it didn't quite work for him, I think there's, as you know, Ed, having read the book, there's a certain amount of conflict in the way that the football was taught. There's a certain responsibility that the players have, and the way that the managers would tend to assume that they already knew the basics, the principles. There's one common phrase that a lot of the players say, I knew that I was good enough to play for Manchester United, that's why they got me. So there's kind of like an assumed capability there. And Sexton was trying to drum the assumed part in, and I think that's what it was. A little bit similar to Van Gaal in a way that they're trying to teach Granny to suck eggs. You know, those players knew that they were capable footballers. They didn't need to be told. Gordon Hill, for example, didn't need to be told about his responsibilities to defend. Obviously, he was aware of that. He was a top-level footballer. But in the rhythm of that football team, his contribution to the side was much better deployed as a striker. And there's a famous example of Martin Buchan clipping him round the ear because he came back for a corner. And people have wrongly assumed that over the years as sort of Gordon getting in the way. He was told to go back and help out. But Buchan was telling him, "We don't need you up here. You know, get back and attack. Get back up there for the counter attack." So, as far as Sexton, I mean, that wasn't under the Sexton era, by the way. That was under Doherty. But it was an example of where the players were in terms of accommodating a player like Hill.
Right.
And Sexton went back the other way. He was trying to teach Hill, showing him the videos of the Hungarian wingers, a little bit like the famous example of Moyes with Ferdinand and Jagielka, you know,
Yes.
trying to teach them how to. Although obviously Hungarian wingers are a lot more. It's a better comparison for Hill than maybe Ferdinand and Jagielka. A lot less insulting anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's where it was for me in terms of. I felt that there was a little bit of a misunderstanding for Sexton, and I wanted to go back and correct it. And like I said, I haven't come to any greater conclusion that his football wasn't dull, but I think hopefully when people are reading it, they might come away with a bit of a better appreciation for what he was actually trying to do. I mean, he certainly wasn't a bad coach. He came with a great reputation, a great history of work that he'd done. And it was unfortunate, really, that it didn't work out because he was such a nice guy. You can imagine that it would have been better for United almost if it had worked out.
Yeah, well, look, great reputation for youth coaching as well. Sexton, under England under-21 manager for so many years, and after he left United, I think he won the under-21 UEFA Championship a couple of times, didn't he? So
yeah, and the thing, sorry to interrupt that one, but yeah, and Atkinson even said to me, if he had a massive amount of respect for Sexton. In fact, he called Sexton the best coach he'd ever seen. And if he had not been so insulted, if he hadn't had so much respect for him, and he didn't think that Sexton would be so insulted, he would have had him as his number 2 at Old Trafford, which I found baffling. You couldn't imagine that happening now, but it was interesting nonetheless.
Sexton left United without winning a trophy, but came quite close twice. So the 79 Cup final, yeah. I guess, within a kick of winning that. I mean, how much do you think that affected him as a manager and United as a team at the time? Really needed that trophy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're so right with that. And it's interesting that we're talking about this the day after the Manchester derby. And I referred to that as a sliding doors moment for Ollie because, if Mata takes that free kick later on, we might go to penalties. A little bit like Wilf McGuinness is a bit dogged by the semi-finals that he reached and he never got to a final. And it was a little bit like that for Sexton, particularly in the 79 final. I think when he got to 2-2, he had Brian Greenough stripped off and ready to come on. And Brian was ready to come on and sort of like delay the time a little bit, because it was like the last minute or something. So they were trying to kill the game off. But Sexton, to his eternal regret, he decided to just hold fire on the substitute. I think he was waiting to do that on the 90th minute, after the final whistle, instead of killing the tempo of the game right there and then. And it was fateful because obviously Arsenal went straight down and scored. Which, I mean, how could you have told a game like that in the momentum and the way that it was going? Because it seemed like it was all with United.
Yeah.
So he was very unlucky with that. And I don't think the 1980 with the title run, I think that was more... it was more clear-cut that it was Liverpool's title. I know it went very close to the last couple of games, but United were never in control of that, and I don't think that they had a team that people thought were going to win the title. So... but he did come close, and you do wonder. I mean, the trophies do have a profound effect on the way that some managers are remembered. I mean, obviously, Doherty is fondly remembered, and he only won one FA Cup, and that basically covers up for the relegation, doesn't it? But, because people talk about that as a glorious side more than they do it being a relegation side.
Right.
And Sexton had nothing really, had nothing to fall back on, nothing to prove that he's, apart from the legacy of the youth players that he left, that he doesn't get the credit for. Duxbury, Whiteside, those kind of players that were coming through.
Which
they were all
Atkinson would go on to benefit from.
Exactly, yeah. So, and like you were saying earlier, he was a great youth coach and he deserves a lot of credit for that. So, yeah, it is unfortunate that all the good things that he did were completely forgotten and absorbed into the good reputation that Atkinson got.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the 79-80 season, as close as United had come for some time, a couple of points to Liverpool, but and a great Liverpool side as well in that period. And I suppose mirrored a few years later when Fergie managed to, in the 89 season, get to second, and,
exactly.
Very close then. Fergie, of course, was given the time to go on and build his great sides. I mean, Sexton got sacked. United weren't doing great in the following season. And the club decided to swing the other way again and bring Atkinson in, who hadn't really, I guess, had an awesome coaching career to that point. Oxford, West Brom, but he'd built a pretty exciting West Brom side. Is that the thing that motivated United to go for Atkinson?
Well, yeah, and he wasn't first choice as well. There was Bobby Robson, Laurie McMenemy was famously the first choice.
Right.
And Sexton was sacked because Edwards thought he had McMenemy in the bag. and then he decided he wanted to stay at Southampton. And so Edwards had to go sort of crawling around the clubs to see if he could get a good sort of replacement for that. And Ron Saunders at Villa was one who was mentioned. Those talks never really went anywhere. Bobby Robson was too loyal to the Cobbold brothers who owned Ipswich at the time.
Right.
So there were a couple of managers there, and then Atkinson, he got West Brom into Europe a few times, and I think he told me, Atkinson, that his ambition was to re-establish United as a European force. So I guess that was kind of where the mindset linked. That West Brom had done quite well into getting into Europe, and obviously whenever they played against United, they'd given a really good account of themselves. They won 5-3 at Old Trafford in a famous game, which Atkinson was very magnanimous in his praise for Sexton, bewilderingly on the Old Trafford pitch afterwards. If you watch the big match, Atkinson's giving Sexton praise, having just tonked his team at Old Trafford. So there was a lot of that, and like you said, the personality of him, the bravado. They were again looking to get away from that kind of personality that Sexton had. It's important to add here as well that Martin Edwards had become chairman in the meantime after Louis Edwards had died, and this was his first major appointment, and he was a little bit reluctant to sack Sexton. But he was also reluctant to sack Doherty as well. He was a junior director at the time, and his father really liked Doherty. And I think if it had been up to the Edwards, Doherty wouldn't have been sacked. That only came after Busby and some of the wives of the directors had complained about the conduct. So they reluctantly sacked him. So I think, having seen the relationship that Tommy had with his father, he wanted kind of like that kind of brash character again, to sort of to have a good relationship with. And by all accounts, Edwards and Atkinson did have a great relationship. And, Atkinson was a larger-than-life character. And I think he really did suit United. Even if he was third or fourth choice, he came in and he was definitely the right man for the job.
Yeah, and perhaps one of his first acts was to make one of the best signings in the history of the club. In Brian Robson famously signed his contract on the pitch with Martin Edwards and Ron Atkinson with what looks like a fold-out table. The social media of the day, I guess. But that would prove to be something pretty inspirational.
If you want more from us, the people what brought you this here podcast, you can follow us on various social media platforms. Ed is on Twitter at NQATpod. You can find us on Facebook at No Question About That Podcast, formerly United Rant. Cheers, Facebook. Or my personal platform of choice, you can follow us on Instagram at NQATpod.
Atkinson said there was a little bit of reticence over paying that fee for him, £1.5 million at the time. In fact, it caused Busby to resign from the board. He was so against it. And he butted heads over the sort of wages for Peter Shilton with Doherty over the years. He didn't want to pay a top wage for a goalkeeper. He just thought the money in the game was going crazy. So the Robson transfer actually caused Busby to resign from the board. And Atkinson had convinced Edwards. He said, you're going to get 7 years of him as a midfielder and then 7 years of him as a centre-back, which is like 14. He was asking 14 years of service, which we actually got from Robson, although they were almost all exclusively played as a midfielder, weren't they? He called him solid gold, and he really was, wasn't he? I mean, people forget how good Robson was. Because we didn't win a league title for those 13 years that he was there, for the first sort of 12, 13 that he was there, and he never got it in his prime. People forget how brilliant he was. This is a player who, when Maradona was on the same pitch, couldn't get his game going because Robson was a dominant factor. He was an absolutely incredible player that I think if anyone watched him live, or if anyone watched him in his prime, and they were, let's say my adolescence was watching Eric Cantona, and he walks into any Manchester United side of mine, it would be the same for those who watch Robson in his prime. Right, he walks into every single team because of how good he was. I guess in a way it's a dirty comparison to make, but a little bit like Steven Gerrard, I guess. Do you know, for Liverpool, in that he didn't win a league title for so long. At least Robson ended up with a couple of medals. But do you know what I mean? He was such a dominating presence that, you know, now when Liverpool fans they will put Gerrard in their best ever team, and I looked at that and say, well, what about Souness? But you understand the comparison that I'm trying to make with that. And
Robson had the all-round game as well, and such a sweet little foot, his passing, the fantastic engine, the commitment, the commitment levels that were too great, in fact, because he got himself injured. All too often as a result, he could score goals with either foot and his head. Fantastic player. We would give an awful lot for Robson today.
Yeah, absolutely. 1.5 million. Yeah, maybe.
So, I mean, I guess Atkinson's two biggest moments with United were the two cup finals, the 83 cup final that went to the replay, and then the Whiteside final in 85. I mean, he was very close to not winning that 83. Very, very close, that final that Brighton gave such a good account of themselves.
Yeah, Smith must score in the last minute of the first game. Yeah, I mean, and they'd also got to the Milk Cup final that year as well. And, you know, they were doing things right. It did take them a little while to get into the swing of things. And I think, you know, for the first couple of years, Atkinson was really trying to get the players that he wanted, but he couldn't get them at the right time. I think he got Arnold Muren in, and he had the idea of pairing Muren with Alan Brazil to recreate their Ipswich connection. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, by the time he gets Brazil, Muren's over the hill and Brazil's knackered. You know, so he was never able to get the parts right. But having said that, the 83 side was a cultured side. It was very, you know, you had Muren in, you had the likes of Robson, who was blossoming at that time. Wilkins as well, very cultured, very good football inside. By the time you get to 85, he's got Strachan and Olsen on the wings, but it's absolutely changed the dimension in that kind of side. And obviously, I know Whiteside had broken through in 83, but it really matured. You had McGraw as well coming in 85 as well. So it was, in a weird way, in just 5 years, he'd created two great sides that had very different identities about them. So, he does deserve a lot of credit for that. I think, as well, 85 stands out as the biggest one because of how good Everton were at the side. I know you mentioned a great Liverpool side. This was the best ever Everton side, wasn't it?
Yes,
they won the league. They were going to win the Cup Winners' Cup.
Their last trophy, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh no, cup final in.
No, we'll forget about that one. Yeah. I can't absolutely erase that one from history. That one. It didn't happen because Cantona didn't play in that one.
That's
So,
right.
but it was the greatest Everton side ever. So it tells you a lot about the achievement of United at that side at that time as well. Because obviously they went on to win the sort of 10 in a row at the start of the following season. So that was there was the beginnings of a great United side. It would be neglectful to not mention the Barcelona game in '84 as well. I know I said that he kicked that Robson played as I kicked Maradona. That doing Robson a massive disservice. Robson played Maradona off the pitch, although there was a rumour that Maradona wasn't 100%, shall we say, at Old Trafford. But that was a great night at Old Trafford as well. And I make the point in the book that some events in football transcend trophies. You have memorable nights. A little bit like, Ollie with
Paris.
It's a bad comparison. I mean, Paris, but that Paris is a game that we're going to remember for the rest of our lives. Because of how incredible it was and what a remarkable turnaround. And that was it was like that for the Barcelona game. Although Barcelona was different because we just outplayed them and there was a force of nature in Brian Robson on that night. But yeah, I think probably the crowning moment of Atkinson's era would have been '85 in the final, because I didn't realise it. I mean, that was the first cup final I remember as a kid. But whenever I've looked back at it and watched it, it's not the best game to watch. You don't appreciate the tension of the time. Which is something that you can't appreciate when you're going back because you didn't live through that experience. You can't appreciate. It's like kids today, if they went back and watched the '99 semi-final replay, you don't really appreciate the sort of build-up and what it was bubbling towards. So it's bewildering to me to read the reports at the time saying that it was the best FA Cup final ever. Do you know what I mean? So I'm watching that and thinking, I don't think so. But yeah, when particularly United had played in, possibly the Brighton game was better, the Arsenal game was better,
right.
The Liverpool game was better. So it's a bit of a crazy one, but yeah, certainly in terms of achievement, it was Atkinson's crowning
his biggest moment. Yeah, I mean, one of the other things, I guess, one of the legacies he left at United was the culture of partying and drinking as well. The club of Robson, Whiteside, and McGrath, and a few others that enjoyed a few liveners after the game, which you talk about in your book as well. And I guess that kind of dates it a little bit, because most footballers today are teetotal and they wouldn't think about that at all. But there's a very specific culture that Atkinson left behind at United after his time.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, it was of its time. And I always, the starting point for my argument was, well, what would you do if you eradicate that drinking culture? Yes, Robson was the best player on the pitch on a Saturday, despite 7 pints on a Friday. But how good would he have been without 7 pints? That was my argument going into it. But so many of the players were talking. Even Gary Bailey, who was a teetotal, I put that argument to him, and he said, well, if you didn't have those sessions, you wouldn't have had the togetherness, the close-knit group, the close-knit friendships of that group would not have been anywhere near as strong. You needed that kind of thing for them to get on as well, for Robson to be the leader of the pack in the way that he was. And I found that a compelling argument, because those are the sort of intangible things that, when you're trying to find the intangibles, you're like, oh, what would have made that extra 1 or 2% to get United over the line and get them a league title? And I say 1 or 2% because that's the kind of phrase that the players would use, or Atkinson would use. We weren't that far away. It was only a couple of things. And I'm always thinking, well, if it's marginal, then 7 pints not being drunk on a Friday night is pretty much a big margin. Yeah, but they were saying, but the compensatory effect in terms of what it had on team spirit and togetherness, and it probably does make sense in a way, because you've got the likes of McGrath and Whiteside, those three they were by far the only three who were drinking, but they were obviously the three biggest names and probably the three best players. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting one. I still don't know where I stand on it. I do probably the sensible option of, without the 7 pints, they would have gone on to win a league title. But I do like the argument that it did create a togetherness, because that's what we remember about that side, isn't it? The fact that they were together.
That's right.
So I do like that romantic assessment of it.
And one of the things that I guess, I mean, it was a contributory factor towards derailing Atkinson's time at United was the sale of Mark Hughes, controversial at the time, and eventually they brought him back, of course. But one of the factors you mention as sort of being part of his downfall, and one of the reasons why he wasn't able to make the next step.
Yeah, and as well at the time, because when he sold him, he brought in Peter Davenport, didn't he, as a replacement, which was not the best example, considering we'd already gone and bought Gary Birtles from Forest, and that hadn't gone very well. So it was an interesting one. Yeah, Hughes was a fan favourite, and he went. Atkinson, I think, had never rated. Very early on in his career, Atkinson didn't think Hughes would make a footballer. And although he did swallow that later on and admit that he was wrong, I think there was a little bit of him that wanted to be proven right, that this is going to still be my team and I still think I'm doing it the right way. And when there was that standoff with, Hughes needed a new contract and knew that he could get a lucrative one elsewhere, they made a good excuse to cash in and get a lot of money at the time. And I think from then it really did start the spiral of everything falling apart, because even though United did start well the following season and got those 10 wins under the belt, for me it was a case of... Was Hughes sold in 86 or was it 85 he was sold?
I think it was 85.
So it was the year before Atkinson was signed. So the point, part of the reason for his downfall was... Yeah, that's right, because Davenport did come in and they were playing well at first. You had Davenport and Stapleton up front who were playing well, and Whiteside. Obviously, everyone was playing well in the first 10 games. Everything looked like they were going to go... all the signs pointed to them winning the league. But as was Atkinson's tendency to do, when there were injuries, he would bring in short-term players. And instead of dipping into the youth, as, Ferguson would do or other managers might do, he got more reliant on these short-term players, like a Garth Crooks and the Terry Gibson and the Colin Gibson and players like that who basically became like nooses around Atkinson's neck, because you had a player like, he brought in John Siverbeck to play at right back, and that really upset Mike Duxbury, for example, who had already contended with John Gidman, and was unhappy that you've got this Danish player who was playing part-time and he's been brought in to take his place, when Duxbury thought he should have gone straight back into the side. So you had a few players like that. I think he had a falling out with Stapleton because he asked Stapleton to play at centre-half. You remember he famously brought Mark Higgins in off an insurance payment. Mm-hmm. And there are a few gambles like this that went horribly wrong in a short period of time. And I think that started to alienate the senior members of the squad who thought... we're not very happy with you at the moment, Ron. And even though, the majority of the squad did stick with him, a few of them were alienated enough to think, I'm not, I think he got to the point where, because he'd been 5 years without a title, they thought he's probably going to be gone here, so we'll just hang on a little bit and just bide our time, which, isn't the best professional attitude to have at United, but that's the way that it was at that point.
Worldwide.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's the way that it came in, like 86. So the wheels were coming off rapidly, and and then he couldn't turn it around. He just couldn't turn it around, which was a shame, because obviously then you look on any management period is always defined by how it ended, isn't it? Really, and it was a real shame for Atkinson that it ended so spectacularly poorly, because people remember the implosion more than they do the good times.
Well, look, this has been really fascinating dive into an interesting period in United's history. I really recommend the book. And when's it out?
We've got this out on the 9th of March.
9th of March. Great. Well, congratulations on the new book. And I suspect it's a period of history that many of our listeners, they're all young'uns, because we're the hipster show, honest. Me and Paul being in our 40s ourselves,
And one thing that I hope that people will take from it is there's a bigger analysis in this about United's identity than I think has been in any other United literature. And I'm not saying that to sort of big up my own research, but everyone always looks at United's identity and style of play as starting and ending with Busby and Ferguson. And I think that there's a lot in this book that will open people's eyes to say that that's not strictly true. There's a way of United playing that is as good as it's ever been in United's history, that doesn't have to follow the pattern of those managers, doesn't have to be hamstrung by by being in the shadow of those managers, because I think that's the big problem that the successors of both Busby and Ferguson have struggled with. There is an identity there that the United supporters can get on board with, as long as you do it the right way. And I think, I don't want to give too much away in terms of spoilers for the book, but there's a complete chapter dedicated to how it doesn't come from Busby and Ferguson. There's a definite pattern of play, so long as you follow the right steps, and so long as you get the backing as well, which is also proved. Yeah, questions
that we can ask today, of course, with still questions about what the identity Ollie wants to build, and whether he'll get the backing. Though in a week that United have spent somewhere between 50 and 70 million on Bruno Fernandes, perhaps he's going to get that backing. We'll see.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not sure with Ollie, but because I am one of those, maybe an infuriating voice to you, Ed, that because he's an old United legend, I do have a little bit more patience for him than I certainly a little bit more patience for him than I did with Mourinho. But then I tend to be patient.
I agree. I mean, I think both Paul and I are big supporters of Ollie. We really would like it to work out. I suspect it won't, but we'll find out on that one.
Yeah, that's. I agree. I agree with you.
Well, thank you very much, and best of luck with the launch of the book. And we'll have you back on when you're producing the next one in 6 months' time or so, I bet.
Well, I've got my. Funnily enough, I've written a biography of Eric Cantona, which is out on April the 2nd. So that's not 6 months, but that's the life of a writer. You sort of bury yourself away for a year, do a couple of things, and then they come out like London buses, and then you do nothing else for another year. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit like that. So
great. Thanks a lot, and cheers.
Question with that.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.